Hello beautiful people, it's your fashionista friend here, and today we are going to be talking about the Gossip Girl book series. So how I thought this video would work is that I would just give my general review, and then I'm going to break down the main differences in the book series from character between the TV show and the book. So let's get into it. As you can see, here's the whole book series, accompanied by my little Dior bag that I thrifted for $2.99. Honestly, one of my most iconic thrift finds. I kind of want to turn this into a little purse. I think that'd be cool. I've been meaning to do it for years, haven't gotten around to it. Anyways, I read the Gossip Girl book series, all 12 of them, and I found the first book in the series when I was thrifting at Goodwill, and then I read the book in 2 sittings because it was really juicy. I liked the books. I gave about each book a 3 or 4 star review on Goodreads. It was kind of like reading trashy TV and was a great escape from my middle class misery. And each book left off on a cliffhanger, just kind of made me want to pick up the next one and continue reading. So it was fun to read a completely different story based on characters that I already knew. I have little blog posts of Gossip Girl here, and it's just like a fun part of reading it. But I will admit, if I hadn't seen the first TV show, I don't know if I would have like read the whole series. Yeah, it was kind of an act of nostalgia, but I'll just show you this here. Like, isn't that just so fun seeing the blog posts like, on paper? I feel like if this book series had been posted today in 2023, it would not fly. You know how things age poorly? I feel like this book series, at least the first few of them, aged poorly, but the book series did get a less taboo as it went on, and I think that's because I believe after the 3rd or 4th book in the series, ghostwriters took over, so take that as how you will. But some content things in the book series that I didn't really like is how they portrayed bisexual and gay people. They enforced a lot of stereotypes in it. For example, there's one character who is bisexual, and the way they perceive him in the book is like, oh, he got with all the girls, so now he has to move on to guys. I found that not okay. So that's one thing. And also, if you're gonna read this and you're triggered by ED talk, I don't recommend reading it because Blair's ED is a lot more prevalent in the book series. I'm not triggered by that kind of content, but it was hard at times to read it because you're in Blair's head. And also there was some moments where Blair was comparing herself to Serena, and that was also hard for me to read as well. Alright, now we're gonna get into the spoilers. So now I'm gonna break this down character by character, and I'd say the main difference from the books to the TV show is that Blair's the main character in the book series compared to Serena in the TV show. And another big difference is that Blair was very on and off with Nate throughout the entire series. She was in this toxic love triangle between Serena and Nate. You know, Nate was kind of just going back and forth between the girls, so toxic. And when I was even writing this out, it was hard to keep track of all the times that Nate and Blair got back together and broke up because they were just so on and off. Another big difference is that Blair, she ended up going to Yale in the book series, which I thought was surprising. It was funny because in her first interview, she ended up blowing it, totally embarrassing herself. She kissed the interviewer on the cheek and was just so cringy and was ranting about her family problems to the interviewer. And her dad is a Yale alum, so he pulled some strings to get her another interview. And so then she got another interview, and the guy who was interviewing her, she ended up hooking up with, and he was significantly older than her. They were sneaking around and dating or whatever for a while, and then Blair found out that he was married, and things ended after that. So yeah, he was having an affair with a 17-year-old, and the interviewer guy was married. Yikes. And then college admission letters come out, and Blair got waitlisted into Yale, but Serena and Nate got in to Yale immediately. And Serena and Nate were nowhere near as good as students as Blair, but on the other hand, they didn't hook up with their interviewer. So another major difference within the series regarding Blair is her family dynamic. Blair's mom and dad get divorced, but in the books, Blair's mom is not a fashion designer. She's just a nepo baby, and her mom still marries Cyrus, but Cyrus has a stepson named Aaron. Aaron is this vegan hippie with dreadlocks, and he always tries to be nice to Blair, but obviously she is not nice to him. But surprisingly, she does warm up to him at some point. They're the same age as well. And I'm surprised they didn't date because I thought that would have been a great plot twist, but they didn't. Aaron ended up going to Harvard, and he dated Serena for a brief moment too, and we'll get into that later. And also Blair had a little brother who was named Tyler, and he was kind of an indie kid. He was into old music, and he ended up being a DJ at the end and dated Jenny. Oh, also Blair's mom got pregnant with Cyrus, and they named the baby Yale before Blair got off the wait list to Yale. Like, can you imagine if she hadn't have gotten in? That would have royally sucked. And then this point in the book, so it's around the time they're graduating high school, and the Constance Billard girls are going on a senior trip to Katie or Isabel's Hampton house, one of their houses. And the Archibald family, Nate's family, has a sailboat, and the family takes all the senior girls out to the Hamptons for their senior soiree, and Nate tags along, even though it's like girls only. All the girls are hanging out in the Hamptons, and Blair and Nate are dating at this point for the 50 billionth time. And you know what happens is she walks in on Serena and Nate hooking up in the guest house bathroom. Oh my god, like, I never thought I'd feel bad for a rich person, but that's really gotta suck. You walk in on your boyfriend cheating on you with your best friend. Honestly, pretty sad. And Nate actually was the one to take Blair's virginity before he cheated on her with Serena. After that, Serena and Nate date for a little bit, but then they realize they're better off as friends, and I'll get more into that later. At this point, once Blair's mom has the baby is taking over Blair's room, so she has to share a room with her stepbrother Aaron, and she just feels really out of place during this, and she's always like trying to get out of the house and move around, and she was even Vanessa's roommate at one point. Yes, Vanessa and Blair Waldorf lived under the same roof together at one point. I know, crazy. So in the books, Vanessa was living in an apartment with her older sister Ruby, and Ruby was in a band, and when Ruby was going on tour abroad with her band, Vanessa needed a new roommate, and that's when Blair came in to live with her for a while, and their friendship was actually really sweet. They were obviously polar opposites, but they played off each other really well. Vanessa humbled Blair in some ways. Also, Blair kind of helped Vanessa find herself more and like be more confident in herself and her look. So that was like pretty great. But then Blair eventually just had enough of the Williamsburg life and got out of there. I think she had just been grossed out by the apartment, and also Vanessa was dating Aaron at the time, her stepbrother. And so she was just like, I'm done with this, and got out of the apartment. Chuck took her to the Yale Club. And at this point, Blair had been accepted into Yale, taken off the wait list. And so while Blair was living at the Yale Club, which is like a country club with like kind of like hotel rooms for alumni, and her next door neighbor at the Yale Club was this Duke guy named Lord Marcus. And he had just graduated from Yale, and he was staying there before he went back to like his home country. So he was royalty, and him and Blair hit it off right away and started dating. Things were going good for them. It helped her get her mind off of Nate, because Nate had cheated on her with her best friend. Eventually, Lord Marcus had to go back to his home country, and Blair missed him, and they were doing long distance, and then eventually she went and visited him. But it was really weird when she was staying over there, because she felt like he was kind of hiding her, and then all of a sudden his cousin showed up. Lord Marcus was giving his cousin more attention, which obviously Blair did not like. She was just really sussed out by it, and so she hopped on a plane early and left. And I'm pretty sure he had an arranged marriage with his cousin, so she honestly did the right thing, just getting out of that cesspool, that what is it called? Incest pool. Ewy. So Blair comes back to NYC and lives with Serena at the time. And Serena and Blair were also always on and off as friends, but then once Nate would date some other chick, they'd be friends again. Super toxic. I know, and it's honestly hard to keep track of. Blair comes back to New York City, is living with Serena for some time, and gets back together with Nate, and she helps Nate get back into Yale because he had gotten his scholarship revoked, and I'll get more into that later on why he got it revoked. It's very juicy. And she got him back into Yale because daddy's a Yale alumni. Gotta love it. Then Blair's mom announces that her whole family is uprooting from New York City and is moving to LA for Cyrus's job, so Blair's literally not gonna have a place in New York City. That sucks. And her home, her heart, her friends are in New York City. This is like the last summer before they're going off to college. Like I said, Blair got Nate back into Yale, and they're like madly in love. And what they do is they steal steal Nate's family's boat and they go sailing around for like a month and have the best romantic time ever. And then they come back and Serena writes Nate a love letter admitting her love for him, and Nate never finds it. But you know who does? Blair Waldorf. And she rips it up into shreds and confronts Serena about it and is obviously not thrilled with Serena. And Serena's a piece of shit for that. She is the worst friend ever. So yeah, that happens. Blair and Serena are not friends again. I don't even know where Blair's living at this point, under a bridge or some shit. No, I'm kidding. But no, I think she was staying at some hotel at that point. Serena realizes that Nate never got her letter, that Blair ripped it up. And so she goes to Nate face to face and tells him that she loves him. It just confuses Nate and he's like, I don't know who to choose. I'm in love with both of them. And so the day for Nate and Blair to go on a train to Yale to start their college careers is approaching. And Serena deferred her enrollment, and I'll get into that later. And so Blair and Nate were supposed to meet up at the train to hop on and go to Yale. It's the day. Blair's waiting for him there, and he isn't showing up, and he's gonna be late. And all of a sudden, Serena shows up because even though her and Blair are on bad terms, she wants to say her final goodbyes. Serena doesn't know that Nate is going to Yale, and they're waiting for Nate, and time is ticking, and like he's got to be there or else he's gonna miss the train. And then Nate Archibald, fuckboy of the decade, texts Serena and Blair the same exact text, and he says, I love you, I'm leaving New York City, I'm not going to college, I'm gonna go sail around the world. And so Blair hops on the train by herself and leaves New York City and goes off to Yale. And while she's at Yale, she meets another guy, I forget his name is honestly not relevant, I'm just gonna call him Yale boyfriend. Things are going great. Winter break rolls around and Blair is visiting her Yale boyfriend's family, and she's hitting it off great with his family and all that jazz. Blair and her boyfriend think that Blair's welcome on their family vacation to like the Bahamas or something, but unfortunately his dad is like, no ring, no bring. So since Blair isn't engaged to his son, she can't go, or married to his son, she can't go on the family vacation. So then Blair is like, I don't know what to do. My family lives in LA, but I don't want to deal with them. So I'm just gonna go rent a hotel in New York City and chill out there. Now she's camping out in New York City in some luxurious hotel on mommy's card or whatever. Nate comes to visit her and she ends up cheating on her boyfriend with Nate. Oof. And then Blair's boyfriend leaves his family vacation early in order to surprise Blair in New York City, and he surprises her by like meeting her in Tiffany's. Blair's the biggest Breakfast at Tiffany's fan, so he like surprises her with meeting her at Tiffany's and buys her this fancy ring. She's overwhelmed with guilt about cheating on him. She says, I can't accept the ring, and she pretty much runs out of there crying and they break up. And then Blair goes back to Yale and she gets back with her boyfriend. And in the book series, they don't really talk a lot about their college life. Books are primarily based in New York City, if honestly only based in New York City. Winter break rolls around again. Blair and her boyfriend are visiting the city. You know, somehow Blair admits that she cheated on her boyfriend last winter break with Nate. And her boyfriend is rightfully really upset by this, and he storms out of their hotel room and he's like, I just need some time to think about this. Like, I thought we were doing so good. And Blair kind of said it as in, he's gone. I messed up last year. I'm so into you. I only want you. They were on good terms, and then that slipped up and he stormed out and was like, I just need some time to think about this. He leaves. Blair's in her hotel room in New York City alone. And then a day or two later, Nate stumbles into her hotel room super drunk. He's like messing around her whole room. I'm pretty sure he took his shirt off and was on her bed crying to her about how much he missed her and stuff. Blair's not having it. She's like, no, whenever you're in my life, shit hits the fan and my life gets so much worse. I'm done with you, Nate. That's what she's saying at this moment. And then, wrong time, wrong place, her boyfriend walks into the hotel room and sees Nate's drunk episode that he's having on her bed. You know when people say, it's not what it looks like? It literally was not what it looked like. Her ex-boyfriend was on her bed, shirtless, and just not a good look, you know? And he just storms out and he's done with Blair. And Blair was so pissed at Nate. Rightfully so. She wasn't kidding when he always messes things up for her. Then Blair goes to study abroad in London. And at the same time, Chuck Bass is studying at Oxford University, and they start dating. which I think is low-key so lame. If you're studying abroad, why are you dating the one kid that you knew in high school? And then Blair has to go back and they do long distance. College grad is closely approaching. Chuck and Blair are starting to make post-grad plans, and Chuck is wanting Blair to move into his apartment with her, and he's like, I'll get like a room decorator to make everything to your taste. I can't wait to be with you. He was so sweet and nice, an amazing boyfriend to her, and was doing the absolute most. But she just kind of realized that she needed to be independent, and all of this like post-grad talk was overwhelming her, and she broke up with Chuck. That was pretty much the end of Blair's character story there. But now we're gonna get into Serena. So in the beginning of the book series, Serena dates Dan very briefly, but Dan love bombs her, and she's turned off by that, and she, breaks up with him. He was super creepy. Serena was also very on and off with Nate throughout the entire series. Another difference is that Serena's brother, he's older, straight, and goes to Brown University. Fun fact, I guess fun, whatever. Serena's brother Eric almost took Blair's virginity, but he didn't because Eric realized that Blair was still in love with Nate, and he could tell that she wasn't ready, so that didn't happen. But they did have a short fling at one point, Eric and Blair. And also throughout the book, Serena had a pretty strong modeling career. Her first big gig was for a perfume, and she had just had the photo shoot after she dated Aaron, Blair's stepbrother. But he just wasn't into Serena's lifestyle and like how independent she is, and he just wasn't into that, and so he broke up with her. And like an hour or so after Aaron broke up with Serena, she had this photo shoot, and she was crying during the photo shoot, and so then they named the perfume Serena's Tears, and that was her big modeling debut. A point where Blair was dating Lord Marcus at this time, but Serena and Blair both auditioned for this Breakfast at Tiffany's spin-off for the main role of Holly Golightly, and Blair didn't get it, which just kind of sucks because she was so dedicated to the role. There's this pattern where Serena doesn't try and she gets everything she wants, and Blair tries really hard and goes through hell to get it, or she just doesn't get it at all. And Serena ended up getting it. She's struggling in the role, and the director for the movie is like such a dickhead and is yelling at her all the time, and Blair and Serena make up at one point, probably because Nate's dating some random girl that doesn't matter. Blair is like coaching her on how to be the perfect Holly Golightly, and she does amazing in the film and gets a pretty big thing in modeling career after that. And since the movie did so well, that's why she decided to defer her enrollment into Yale. While Blair's in college, Serena took a few years off, and then when she decided to go back to college, she starts dating Dan Humphrey again. Serena goes from like this A-lister, wild child party girl to lame, clingy girlfriend, I guess, because she goes to Yale, but every weekend she leaves Yale to go visit Dan in New York City because she's dating him, and they dated for quite a few years. Alrighty, now the next character we're going to talk about is Dan, and he was very on and off with Vanessa throughout the entire series. And he was also a poet, writer, that was his thing, and he got posted in the New York Post, I believe, or some fancy literary magazine, and he was pretty pretentious about it. He was on his literary high horse. And he even ended up cheating on Vanessa with some chick he met through his literary agent, and they broke up after that, and he was dating this girl for a little while. Then Dan ended up getting recruited into this band, this famous band called The Raves, and they liked him so much because he could turn his writing into songs for them, and those were their best songs. His career in this band was pretty short-lived. He had 2 performances. The first performance, he did really well, but he was blackout drunk. Don't let that influence you. And then the second time he was performing, he was again very, very drunk, and then what happened is he was gonna throw up, and he ran off stage and was, throwing up. You could hear everything. And he was fired after that, which is good because this guy was like ego. After that, Dan started working at a famous bookstore in New York City. Him and his coworkers made this literary group together, and when they were at the literary group, Dan got way too drunk, and his, partner in making the literary group ended up kissing him, and then this made Dan question his whole sexuality. Dan tells Jenny this in a letter. Jenny's studying in Prague with their mom. More on that later, but all you need to know right now is Dan came out to Jenny in a letter that he was gay, and Jenny told their estranged mother that. And then their mom came back. I do not like their mom at all. Their mom came back to the United States to throw Dan a coming out party, and she was pretty controversial in the way that she was just bringing up up all these stereotypes. And it was kind of sad to see she pretty much abandoned her son, but then she came back into the picture when he came out. It was just weird. And then soon after the coming out party, Dan's coworker, who made him question his sexuality, told him, hey, I'm sorry, but I met somebody else. I hope we can still be good friends. Hearing that, Dan was really confused, and he was like, I still like Vanessa though, and so him and Vanessa got back together. Also, side note, Vanessa was so sweet with Dan about him questioning everything. She was like so nice and supportive. Dan and Vanessa were very on and off, but their friendship relationship was so confusing because they would be together, then they'd break up, then they'd just be friends, then they would hate each other, and then they'd be roommates, and then they'd hate each other, and then they'd be best friends, and then they'd be roommates at the same time, then they'd date. It was just so messy. When applying to college, Dan got into Columbia and Evergreen. Evergreen's a college that's in Washington State, and he originally went there for his freshman year, and him and Vanessa were doing long distance, but then Dan decided to transfer to Columbia for his sophomore year. Then they broke up eventually. Dan cheated on Vanessa again with some other girl that he met through the bookstore that he was working at, and then Dan got with Serena. Dan ended up breaking up with Serena eventually at the end of the series because they were just so different, and he kind of felt like he was holding her back. And also, they were completely different people, you know? I never shipped Dan and Serena. I ship Nate and Serena, honestly, because they're both horrible people. I mean, Blair's horrible too, but she's horrible in, like, petty ways. Serena's a horrible friend. Next, moving on to Chuck. He was not as big of a character as he was in the TV show. At the same time, I feel like he's the character with the most development throughout the book series. Also, Chuck's dad is not a big character at all, and his dad is still alive. And throughout the series, Chuck seems kind of like a loner. Nobody really likes him. He's still, you know, a creep. Also, a thing about in this book is Chuck is bisexual, and I don't like the way they portray his sexuality in the book. I find it offensive because all the characters were saying, oh, Chuck's into guys now because he's hit on all the girls and he got rejected by all the girls, so now he has to move on to the guys. That doesn't sit right with me. Like I mentioned earlier in Dan's section, Dan's coworker that he had a crush on, who was gay, ended up getting with Chuck. Chuck was the guy that the bookstore coworker left Dan for. Another big part of Chuck's character is that he has this little pet monkey. Very random, I know. I'll get into more detail about it. And his pet monkey is named Sweetie, and that's his best friend and his only real friend, honestly. Chuck applies to a bunch of colleges, but he doesn't get into any of them that he applies to. So his family forces him to go to this college in the middle of nowhere where he has to work on a farm and take classes at the same time, and this humbles him. He even admitted that he needed it, and it totally changed him as a person. Like, he was no longer an asshole. He went there for 2 years and then transferred to Oxford University in London. He starts dating Blair and yada yada yada. Next, moving on to Nate. So, like I said before, Nate goes back and forth from dating Serena, Blair, Serena, Blair, Serena, Blair, random girl, Serena, Blair, Serena, girl, Jenny, Serena, Blair, random girl, Jenny, random girl, Serena, Blair, Serena. That's like his dating history right there. He dates Jenny twice throughout the book series. Once in the beginning and once at the end. But one thing I do like about Nate, like I've mentioned before, his family's into sailing. That's another big part of his life, is sailing, lacrosse. Those are his 3 hobbies. Sailing, lacrosse, breaking girls' hearts, and smoking 420. That's 4 hobbies. That's Nate for ya. But he has a house up in Maine, which I appreciate because I'm a Mainer. And that's where he goes up there and builds sailboats and sails around and stuff. So that's fun and cool about Nate. So I want to get into why the first time Nate dated Jenny. Pretty scandalous. So she was a freshman in high school at the time. They started dating. It was after him and Blair had broken up, and it was like a breath of fresh air to him because Jenny was pretty chill compared to Blair. I mean, I think any girl would be, but one day they're in the park, like making out, and Vanessa in the book series is also really into film, and she's just like filming around randomly, and she catches Nate and Jenny making out in the park, and Jenny's pants are down. And Vanessa gets that on video, and then Vanessa's camera is stolen. Whoever stole it, but somebody gave it to Gossip Girl, and then Gossip Girl posted that on their website, literally CP. Gross. And that caused a lot of ruckus. And also in the book, Nate is stoned 24/7. Eventually, he gets caught by the police in the setup for when he was buying 420. Sorry, I have to say that because you know how YouTube is. And then his family sends him to a rehab, like outpatient program in Greenwich, Connecticut. While he's out there in Greenwich going to rehab, He meets this girl named Georgie, and she has serious substance issues, and they start dating. Nate actually saves her from ODing once, but then after that, he told the program and they couldn't date anymore because Georgie had to focus on herself. And Georgie's family was actually really close with the Bass family, and I believe Chuck did something, pretty much outed her on how bad her problems were to her parents, and so that's how Chuck got the monkey, is her family was like, thank you, Chuck, for doing that. Here's a pet little monkey named Sweetie, and that was Chuck's best friend and sidekick throughout the entire book series. Then eventually Nate finished up his rehab program, and the school year was ending, and then he went on that trip, got caught cheating on Blair with Serena in the guest house bathroom. During that time, Serena and Nate kind of felt obligated to date because of what they had done to Blair, and Nate was filled with a lot of guilt and regret, and when he was dating Serena, it was hard for him to get hard. Awkward. And so what he ended up doing to make up for that is he started stealing his lacrosse coach's Viagra, and eventually he got caught by his coach, and then his coach took away his high school diploma. He's like, you stole my Viagra, I'm taking away your high school diploma unless you work for me for free throughout the whole summer at my Hamptons house. So Nate had to go work on the Hamptons for free and do a bunch of yard work and stuff like that in order to get his diploma back. And when Nate was there, the coach wasn't there a lot, and the coach's wife was really creepy to him and was constantly hitting on him and making him feel really uncomfortable, and he was stuck in such a weird position because he knew his coach wasn't going to believe him if he spoke up about it. And so what he decided to do was just leave the Hamptons. And so he wasn't going to get his diploma back. He flees the Hamptons, gets back together with Blair. Blair gets him back into Yale. They sail around the country or whatever the summer for a month. And during this time, he's super lost in life. And so his dad's friend is his mentor for all of this, helping him out figure out what he wants to do with his life, where he wants to go and move forward. And so during the time of when he was getting ready to go to Yale, his mentor asked him, do you want to be my first mate in sailing around the world instead of going to college, take some time off? And so that's what Nate did instead of going back to Yale with Blair. Once he got back from the rendezvous around the world on the sailing trip, he went to the farm college for 2 years, the same one that Chuck went to. And then after that, he transferred to Brown. Around that time, Jenny was then a freshman in college, and she was going to RISD, which is another school in Providence, Rhode Island School of Design. And so they start dating. More on that later. Now it's time to talk about Jenny, aka Little J. In the TV show, Jenny is blonde. In the books, she is the complete opposite of that. She's short, brunette, and has curly hair. And this is weird to bring up, but it was a constant theme throughout the book regarding Jenny, is that she has big boobs. And like I mentioned earlier, Jenny dated Nate briefly, had that whole CP scandal on Gossip Girl. That was really sad. She was also really stalkerish when it came to dating Nate. She painted 8 paintings of him in different styles of artists. She also wasn't really into fashion in the book series. She was really into art. On New Year's, Nate ends up cheating on Jenny with Blair, and that ends their relationship right then and there. Then Jenny has a short-lived modeling career that she got through Serena and her connections. They stayed friends, even though Serena dated Dan briefly, but, they were friendly. Didn't hang out a lot. They talked occasionally. So Serena and her did a photo shoot, and it kind of painted Jenny in a bad light. Pretty much the photo shoot had Jenny next to all these really model-esque girls, and then Jenny was the short brunette. Found the advertising kind of offensive. The school caught wind of this, and on top of her scandal with disgusting video being posted, and then this advertisement that was in all the magazines, the school was getting really mad at Jenny, and they were almost done with her. They wanted to expel her. And on top of that, during the time of when Dan was in that popular band, The Raves, Jenny was dating the drummer, who was like 20, and she was 15. Jenny was just a wild child getting into all sorts of mess. Kind of sad, honestly. Paparazzis were getting pictures of Jenny dating this older guy, and the school at that point was like, you are done here, girl. Like, after this semester, you cannot come back. So then Jenny ended up going to boarding school at Waverly. And she actually has a whole spin-off book series called It Girl. I haven't read it. I've been thinking about it, but I don't know. I think I've had enough of this young adult drama after reading that whole series. After Jenny goes to boarding school, we don't really hear about her much until Dan comes out to her, abroad visiting her mom in Prague. And her mom then comes back to the US to throw Dan a coming out party. The years Years go by, Jenny graduates Waverly, and she gets accepted to RISD, and around this time is when she starts dating Nate again. In their relationship, they were very codependent, and she found that Nate was pretty boring. He had settled down and changed a lot from his time at that farm college and didn't go out much, and she got pretty bored of Nate and decided to break up with him eventually after a year or so of dating. Towards the end, she starts dating or having a little romance with Blair's little brother, who's a DJ at that time. Next, moving on to Vanessa. Vanessa's appearance was also very different throughout the book. She has a shaved head, wears black all the time, and Doc Martens, and also they've been saying she has very fair skin. And like I said earlier, her and Dan were very on and off and had a complicated ass relationship. One minute they were dating, the next minute they were best friends, then the next minute they hated each other, and that cycle just kept repeating throughout the whole series pretty much. Oh, and another piece of hot tea regarding Vanessa is, so when Blair and Vanessa were living together in the same apartment, she was dating Blair's stepbrother. She was kind of getting done with Aaron's shit. He was too hopelessly romantic, like mushy for her, and she was actually cheating on Aaron with Dan at the time when Blair was living in the same apartment as her, and Dan and Vanessa would sneak up to the roof of their apartment complex and hook up when Blair was literally downstairs. I don't think she ever found out, but that's just so messy. And then Aaron's stepbrother ended up breaking up with Vanessa because he had gotten the feeling that she was cheating on him. He was kind of just like, you've been hanging out with Dan a bit too much. I think it's better we, break up. And Vanessa was like, okay. Never admitted to cheating on him. And even after Blair moved out of the apartment, Vanessa and Blair still stayed good friends. They were there for each other through it all, especially when Serena was being a piece of shit. Vanessa was always a real one to her. Vanessa's big dream was to always be an independent filmmaker, and she ended up getting a deal with the guy who was the director of the Breakfast at Fred's movie, and she was even the filmmaker when Serena was acting in it. But then she got fired due to creative differences by the director, and that director guy was such an ass. And then once Vanessa's sister came back from tour, her sister Ruby kicked her out of the apartment because she had a boyfriend who she ended up marrying. So rude though. Vanessa was honestly homeless and she had nowhere else to go, so she moved in with the Humphreys, and at this point her and Dan were not on good terms because Dan had cheated on her. But she always was really close with Rufus, and he had the father relationship with her. He was always really sweet to her. And also, side note about Rufus never dated Lily Woodsen in the series. That was never a thing. And Vanessa stayed in Jenny's room while Jenny was away at boarding school. And so while Vanessa was rooming in the Humphreys' apartment, they'd get back together, they'd break up, they'd just be roommates, they'd ignore each other, super messy, yada, yada, yada. Eventually, Vanessa meets this filmmaker guy who's perfect for her, and they start dating. His name's Hollis, by the way. But then filmmaker boyfriend gets on his high horse because he had been getting all these movie deals, and he kind of just wanted her to be like a stay-at-home girlfriend, and she didn't like that. She felt like she was holding herself back being in this relationship. And even at one point, her and Hollis wanted to make a movie based off of Vanessa's own life story and how she's felt like an outcast in this high society of New York City. Hollis and her took it to this film executive place. The film executive shit all over the idea, and then Hollis kind of took the executive side, and that put a crack in their relationship. So she ended up breaking up with him and moving back into the Humphreys, and then ended up going to NYU's film program and commuting to school while staying at the Humphreys. So, in conclusion, everyone broke up at the end. Blair and Chuck broke up, Serena and Dan broke up, Jenny and Nate broke up, and Dan and Vanessa were no longer together, but they were roommates. And they were roommates.
And they were roommates.
Oh my god, they were roommates.
And I don't think they got back together at the end, but they were still living together. They were probably bound to get back together, honestly. Also, another major difference is that the books never admitted to who Gossip Girl is, but I have my theories and I don't think it was Dan. And I say this because why would Dan submit that disgusting video of his own little sister to be posted online? That's why I don't think it was Dan. My theories of who Gossip Girl is I think it was Chuck, because he wasn't brought up that much or roasted a lot on Gossip Girl, so that's why I have my inkling, but the book never flat out admitted it. Or it might have been some background character like Katie or Isabel, but who really knows? Yeah, that was really annoying. I was really hoping that they were gonna admit who Gossip Girl is, but they never did. But at the end of the day, I think it was Chuck. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this whole spoiler sesh of the Gossip Girl book series. If you want to follow me on other social platforms, I'll have them linked down below. I like to report on corruption in the fashion or entertainment industry, and I guess a little mix of whatever else I want to do. And anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching. XOXO, Gossip Girl.